For today's video, I'll be going over my Corydoras care guide to help fellow fish keepers who are considering adding these fantastic little fish to their tank. To start, let's do a quick species introduction. Corydoras are a popular type of catfish in the aquarium hobby, and their peaceful nature lets them thrive in a wide range of tank setups. I'll be focusing specifically on Corydoras aeneus for this video, as that's a species I've kept for nearly 18 months now, but there's plenty of other options out there. Thankfully, Corydoras aeneus are the most popular type of Cory in the hobby, and they're very easy to find in stores and they're usually very cheap. It's also worth mentioning that the Corydoras genus recently underwent a reclassification. Rather than there being one single genus, they've divided it down into 7 different groups to better distinguish the different lines of catfish. So moving on, let's talk about the appearance of Corydoras aeneus, which comes in a few different varieties. In my tanks, I keep the albino Cory, and there's also the bronze Cory, with both of these variants being very cheap and easy to find. There's also some rarer varieties too, like the laser Cory, the black Venezuelan Cory, and the more controversial glow Cory, as well as a couple of others. Corydoras aeneus usually grow to just under 3 inches in size, or around 7 centimeters, but some may stay smaller than this due to some genetic problems with the species. As catfish, they do have their little cute whiskers or barbels that are used to sift through the substrate in their tank while foraging for food. I currently have 5 Corydoras aeneus, and in my experience a few of them are far greedier than others, leading to some weight gain issues. This is not to be confused with the 2 female Corydoras I have, who are currently still spawning and are carrying eggs. So moving on to tank size, which can be a bit more of a controversial topic when it comes to Corydoras. From what I can see, a lot of the disagreements are due to people using the general term of Cory or Corydoras without specifying the exact species or variety that they are referring to. For example, it's generally recommended that Corydoras aeneus, like the ones I have, will be kept in a tank that's at least 20 US gallons, with larger tanks always being better. I initially kept mine in a 29 gallon tank before moving them over to their current home in my 40 gallon setup. In my opinion, size is important because Corydoras are bottom dwellers and they'll rarely venture into the middle or upper layers of their tank, so they do need a larger footprint for swimming. Additionally, they're a social species, so they usually do better in groups, and I often see people say keep a minimum of 6. As I mentioned though, I have 5, and as far as I can tell they do seem happy and content, and for the last couple of months they've been breeding constantly. So moving away from Corydoras aeneus, smaller species like pygmy Corydoras, which swim in both the bottom and middle layers, can do well in a tank that is at least 10 gallons or over. Then there's something like the Corydoras habrosus, which is in between pygmy Corys and Corydoras aeneus, and they usually require a 15 gallon tank at an absolute minimum. The key takeaway here is that different Corydoras species vary in size and usually need different tank sizes to thrive. My Corydoras aeneus are usually very active and make full use of the space they have to swim, so I would recommend a minimum tank size of 20 US gallons for the Corydoras aeneus variety. Ideally, you will be leaving as much of the bottom layer as open as possible for them to forage, rather than covering it in driftwood or hardscape too. So that brings me on to tank setup, and this is another controversial topic when keeping Corydoras. You may see people say that Corydoras should only ever be kept on fine sand, as anything else risks damaging their barbels, and this may be true to some extent, but I do wonder how realistic the risk is when they are only on slightly fine gravel. I used Petex Roman gravel for the substrate in my 29 gallon tank, which has a grain size of around 2mm, right between coarse sand and fine gravel. My Corydoras were always foraging in the substrate without issues, looking for detritus worms and other little insects that they could eat. My current 40 gallon tank uses aqua soil as its substrate, and again the Corydoras are always foraging for food and digging into the aqua soil without issue. Now, to clarify, I'm not suggesting you use any of the sharper substrates out there, but I do just want to point out that in my opinion, Corydoras will do well on substrates other than just fine sand. Another important factor to consider is that you're providing enough foraging space for your Corydoras. As I mentioned earlier, it is rare that they'll move into the middle or upper layers of their tank, so they need plenty of room to dig into the substrate on the bottom layer. As you can see, I've tried to keep the foreground as open as possible in my 40 gallon to leave my Corydoras to dig freely. I do sometimes notice some foraging around in the background amongst the rotala rotundifolia, so thin stemmed plants shouldn't really be much of an issue for them. I would recommend against the heavy use of rocks or driftwood on the substrate for a Cory tank though, as it might be difficult for them to dig around and keep themselves entertained. Aside from that though, my Corydoras have been very easy to care for. Corydoras just seem to be a very bold and outgoing species of fish, and I often see them relaxing in the middle of the tank without any cover near them, as if they just don't have a care in the world. So next up, let's talk about water parameters, and there's also some uncertainty around this one as well, with there often being debates around the optimal water parameters for Corydoras aeneus due to debates on their natural habitats. Some people believe that Corydoras aeneus are widespread through South America, reaching as far south as Argentina, while other people argue that a lot of those fish that are further south are actually just similar looking fish from a different species of Corydoras. According to those people, true Corydoras aeneus are only native to the island of Trinidad, and the rest are just similar looking fish. This ends up raising two possibilities: either they inhabit a wide range of different environments from tropical to temperate, or they're just native to a small area with very specific water parameters. Personally, I've always kept my Corydoras in soft water tanks with a pH as low as 6.4 without issue, but I have seen people keep them in hard water tanks and still have zero problems with their fish. Temperature is another area of debate, but thankfully most people agree on the recommended ranges of between 70 to 81 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 to 27 degrees Celsius, but some people have kept Corydoras aeneus at room temperature without issue. Now, a point to note is that the average winter room temperature here in the United Kingdom is usually between 18 and 21 degrees Celsius, which is at the lower end of their recommended range, so if your room temperature is 21 degrees, it is still within their recommended range. Pets at Home, our larger chain store here in the UK, sells Venezuelan black Corys, which are accepted as a variety of Corydoras aeneus as a temperate room temperature fish. I actually know someone who's kept his Venezuelan black Corys in an unheated tank for years without issue, but again, the average year-round room temperature here in the UK can be within their recommended ranges anyway. The thing is, if Corydoras are as widespread as some people say, and they do go as far south as Argentina, then this could explain why some lines of the species can thrive in room temperature tanks. Think of something like the Buenos Aires tetra, which comes from the same region in Argentina and does well in unheated tanks, which could share the same native waters as some Corydoras species lines. As always, I do recommend only adding Corydoras to a cycle tank that maintains ammonia and nitrite levels at 0 ppm, supported by established colonies of bacteria and archaea to keep them as safe as possible. I have seen some people say that Corydoras need well oxygenated water, but they can breathe atmospheric air from the surface, and I regularly see mine darting up to the surface to get a breath regardless of if I have air stones in the tank or not. So to summarise the water parameters for Corydoras aeneus, I'd keep them in a fully cycled tank with water temperature ranges between 70 and 81 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 and 27 degrees Celsius, as well as try to get a pH that's as close to 7.0 as possible. This almost guarantees that they are within optimal ranges to make sure that your Corydoras can thrive in their aquarium. So let's move on to diet and feeding, and in my experience these have been one of the easiest fish to feed by far. I know that Corydoras are officially listed as omnivores, but in my experience they definitely prefer to eat foods that are high in protein. The staple foods for my Corydoras are basically fluval bug bites bottom feeder formula, which has black soldier fly larvae as their main ingredient. In addition to that, I also feed the shrimp in this tank daily with Hikari mini algae wafers, and my Corys will steal some from the shrimp, and despite the name, these actually have fish meal as their primary ingredient, not algae, so they are high in protein as well. For treats, I usually use bloodworm for one meal per week, which my Corydoras absolutely love. I know that there's other worm options in the hobby like tube effects worms, but my water flow in the tank just blows these around constantly and the other fish usually eat them before the Corydoras get a chance. I've lost count of the number of people who've recommended California blackworms to me as well, but unfortunately they're very difficult to find in my area and I've never seen anyone have them in stock, but I do want to give them a try in the future. I've also seen my Corydoras foraging in the substrate of their tanks for detritus worms and other small insects, and they just wolf them down as soon as they find anything. Despite some websites listing Corydoras as algae eaters, I've never ever seen my Corys eat algae and have had plenty of opportunities. Since Corydoras are bottom feeders, it is important to try and find a food that will sink to the substrate before the other fish in the tank can eat it. That's why I'm such a fan of fluval bug bites and Hikari mini algae wafers, because they sink very quickly, letting my Corydoras get their share of the food. As I mentioned earlier though, some of my Corydoras are very greedy compared to the others, and they'll happily eat their own food and then wait for the other food from the other fish to sink down to the substrate and eat that as well. It is important to monitor the size and weight of your Corydoras and adjust the amount of food you provide as necessary to keep them healthy, but other than that they've been very easy to feed. So moving on, let's talk about tank mates, and Corydoras are very peaceful and passive fish, making them ideal for most community tank setups with other calm species of fish. At the time of recording, I've kept my Corydoras with neon tetras, cardinal tetras, guppies, chili rasboras, harlequin rasboras, honey gourami, pearl gourami, a Siamese algae eater, cherry shrimp, Armano shrimp and neurite snails. I've never once observed any intentionally aggressive behaviour from my Corydoras towards their tank mates, but they can be very clumsy when it comes to foraging for food. Sometimes I have seen them accidentally push shrimp off the food, but it's not out of aggression, and as far as I can tell the shrimp aren't injured either, as they just flash their pleopods and get away as fast as possible. Overall though, Corydoras aeneus make excellent tank mates for other peaceful fish, and I don't think they'll cause issues with other things that I haven't personally kept them with, such as danios or minnows or anything like that. It is worth noting that Corydoras do have a venomous spine on their dorsal fin, and I do see people comment on social media worrying about that, but I really don't think it's a bigger risk as people make out. I do want to briefly touch on breeding Corydoras, but it's not something that I actively do with my fish. That said, if you do follow my channel, especially the monthly fish room updates, you'll know that my Corydoras have been spawning constantly for about 5 months now. I'm not doing anything, I'm not changing their environment or changing their foods or doing water changes or anything to try and get them to spawn. It's just natural behaviour with them in the tank, laying eggs pretty much everywhere. This does lead me to believe that Corydoras aeneus would be a relatively easy species to breed if that is something you're interested in the hobby, but like I said, I'm not doing anything, they're just laying eggs everywhere, and then my Siamese algae eater goes around and eats them all. Finally, I want to briefly mention some common health issues, as Corydoras aeneus can sometimes have problems due to inbreeding. You may have noticed that one of my Corys has a bump on its back, and I'm not sure what caused this, and in all honesty I've just put it down to being a birth defect in the fish. Other than that visual bump, it doesn't seem to have affected the fish's behaviour or health in any way though. Now, I haven't personally encountered this next one, but I have seen a fair few people on social media ask why their Corydoras aeneus aren't grown as large as the other ones in their tank, and I'm guessing it's a genetic issue due to inbreeding. These fish are bred in huge numbers due to their popularity, so there will be some genetic issues getting into the breeding line, but still, in my experience, other than those two faults, they have been a pretty hardy species to keep. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. Corydoras have been a great fish to keep, and I really do like watching them swim around because they're more like aquatic puppies than actual fish. Hopefully this has helped you offer the levels of care that they deserve in your own tank, so have a good day and thanks for watching.